And we're live. Welcome to the Modern Romantic podcast, where we celebrate and inspire romanticism by featuring passionate people doing incredible things. My name is not Trey. Today I am Emily, and Trey is ill today, so we're hoping he feels better and comes back with us next week. But for now, it's me, and I'm here today with Joel Robison, hailing from the UK. Joel is a photographer with some really, really cool artwork, and I'm really excited to chat today. Welcome to the show, Joel.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you're from Canada originally, though, right?
I am, yeah. So
Okay.
don't expect any like great British accent because I don't have one.
That's okay. I'm in Minnesota, so I get the Canadian thing
It is
anyway.
quite similar.
Yeah, when I lived in the southern US, some people would ask if I was from Canada. Yeah, eh.
It's not a bad thing to be called.
No, I don't think so at all. Yeah, we love our Canadian neighbors. Mm-hmm. So tell me about your work. How do you describe it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's an answer that changes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when I first started, I kind of struggled calling myself a photographer because when you say that you're a photographer, it conjures up this idea of like portraits or weddings or like very
Mm-hmm.
like traditional avenues of photography, and that's not necessarily what I do. So then I would call myself like a digital artist, but then that people would think that I was more of like an illustrator or I like did digital paintings, and I don't really do that either. It's like a blend. So it kind of went through all these different waves. And a few years ago, I kind of just started telling people that I was like a visual storyteller. And now I like to call myself a professional daydreamer, because that feels like that's actually what I do is a daydream for a living. But it's sort of a blend of all of those things. So photographer, digital artist, visual storyteller, professional daydreamer. That's sort of what I do is create kind of visual stories that are based on my own dreams or my own fears or my own connections with nature, and just finding ways to kind of tell the story of what life looks like through my eyes and share it with other people.
And it has an air of whimsy to it and
Hmm.
adventure and lots of nature.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely up my alley personally.
Oh,
I
thanks.
love your work. I'm a big
Thanks.
fan.
Thanks.
I love the professional daydreamer title. It looks like Josh does too. Yeah, it's if you haven't not seen Joel's work, go to joelrobison.com, JoelRobison.com, and or his Instagram, same thing, same spelling. And go look because it is phenomenal. And
Thank
I
you.
love you do a lot of things where you're like the miniature
Hmm.
version of yourself. Because it's
Yeah.
self. They're like self portraits.
Yeah, most of my work is self-portraits. And I think like part of that stemmed from like me just being nervous about photographing other people. So when I
Sure.
first started, I was really nervous about working with other people. And so I was like, well, I'll just work on taking pictures of myself until I feel good enough to like take pictures of other people. But then I found it really empowering and really kind of interesting to share my own visual life story through me being the main character of those images as well. And yeah, I've always been inspired by like those kind of wild and crazy stories like Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, and like all those stories where like the world is sort of the same but blended with this idea of make believe and fantasy. And so a lot of my images kind of play with that of being real enough that it looks like a real location or a real place with real things, but just skewed slightly through scale or through perspective or through, just little bits of imagination sprinkled through. And I like being able to kind of use a location that people might walk past every day and just show it in a slightly more magical way. So that kind of taking people and shrinking them down into a miniature size really plays well to that ability of taking any location at all, and if you shrink someone down, it just turns into a totally different place, with a different story to tell.
And it is fantastic. I love how you can take something that maybe people see as mundane, a
Mhm.
location, or even an object, a prop, and it becomes, even your own camera is a prop in some of your photography. And I think that's really neat how you use that to create a slightly different world.
Thanks. Yeah, I think part of it is just that I like to think that there's magic everywhere and that there's sort
Mm.
of storytelling can happen anywhere and everywhere. And you don't have to have, these beautiful locations, or you don't have to have this great selection of all these, interesting props or items to use. You can literally just pick up a pencil and create a story with it, and create something really cool with it. And I've always been kind of thrifty, and I've always been sort of just use what you have around you. And when an idea comes and I just have the right things around me, I'll just go out and create it. And I think that, that's the joy of being an artist, is that you just get to pull these sort of creative ideas from anywhere and just see where they go. And I love the whole process of it.
Yeah, it's evident that you
Right.
do. I think there's part of you personally that I think the wonder that you are able to portray in these photos is I think it's cool because it's like you're really there, but you're
Mm.
also really there in your mind. Like
Mm.
this is also your world.
Yeah, definitely. I've always been a really curious person, and I always have loved sort of exploring and wandering and just like looking around, and I'll always notice things that when I'm walking with other people, I'll be like, did you see that? And they'll be like, no, we walked right past it. And I'm always just sort of like keeping an eye on things, and I think that that really shows in my images. I want
Mhm.
them to feel like, you're stumbling across a scene that, maybe if you didn't look twice, you would have missed it. And that's sort of my idea, is to show people that, look twice at something, or just look a little bit more careful at something, you might see something special or magic. And I like to infuse that idea into my work.
Those little details that others may miss.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um so when you were first starting,
hmm
did it take you very long to find your own style?
it kind of did. Like when I was younger, when I was a kid growing up, all I wanted to be was an artist. So when you're a kid and people are like, what do you want to be when you grow up,
Yeah.
that was the only answer I had, and it was very specific. I wanted to be an animator at Disney.
Oh,
That was like
yeah.
the job I wanted. Like no, nothing else was good enough. That was it. That was it. That was it. And I kind of got to like high school and realized like I maybe didn't have the skills that you might need to work at Disney. I really loved drawing, but I wasn't world class level at it, and
Okay.
so I kind of just shoved all kind of creativity aside, and I just was like, well, that's not for me, I guess. And I just went into kind of normal life, went to school, went to college, started a regular job, and then I felt like this kind of big part of me missing, and I tiptoed back into being creative, and it took a long time. And it was like a crash course in all sorts of different styles of creativity. So I tried drawing and painting and pottery and all different stuff, and nothing really felt like it was coming together. And then I came across kind of this conceptual or creative photography online, and I kind of got, it was like this little spark ignited in the back of my head. And I was like, well, that's different. And I'm from a small town in Canada. We didn't have a lot of exposure to kind of this creative style of photography. And so that spark just kind of grew and grew and grew. And very quickly, I realized that, I wasn't that interested in taking pictures of clouds or flowers or, people necessarily, but I really wanted to maybe use my camera and Photoshop to create images that were the ones I would have drawn if I could draw. And so that's sort of where that style came from. Is like, if I were to draw this, what would it look like? And can I use my camera and Photoshop to do that instead? And very quickly I realized that, yeah, I can do that. And it just led me down this wild path that I've been on for like 12, 13 years now.
Very cool. Did you have any, like, for some of us, getting in front of our own lens is kind of not a comfortable thing. How was that for you?
Yeah, it was tough. I didn't have a very easy time growing up at times. I was bullied quite a lot, and I had a really low self-esteem, and I was quite introverted, and spent a lot of time like pretending like I didn't exist. So then suddenly when I was putting myself in front of the camera,
Hmm.
forcing myself to exist and like taking photos of myself, it was really a strange experience. And it took me a while to like feel okay with like seeing what was there.
Yeah.
I think, we don't always like the way that we look when we look at a picture of ourselves. And I think for me, it took me a while to understand that. And then, as I kind of grew up and started looking more at, life as a whole, I realized, there's such a privilege in being able to grow older and get to see yourself age and to see yourself progress through your own life. And I think that's been one of the unexpected joys of doing kind of self-portraiture, is that I look similar as I did 12 years ago, but I'm older, and
Sure.
I get to see myself change, but I also get to see how my life outside of the way I look has changed as well through those images. And I remember one time I had taken this photo. It's like a really close-up portrait, and I had sort of like face, like paint kind of on my face, and I was looking at myself in the screen of my computer face to face, and it was like life size. And I realized like I hadn't looked at myself in 5 or 6 years, like looked at myself in the eyes, and it was a really powerful moment of seeing myself and acknowledging myself. And like it was a really cleansing time to just like say, this is who you are now, and this is, you're grown up, you're a man, and like this is the life that you have, and look at where you've been, and look at what you've done, and look at what you want to do. And yeah, it is sometimes difficult, but it's also hugely rewarding. You get to have this sense of like presence that I think I would miss if I didn't do that.
That is brave, but so so cool. There's a little bit of wisdom there too. I mean, I think if you can have the guts to do something like that and then grow from it, is, yeah, that must be also pretty rewarding.
Definitely. I
Yeah.
think, there's been times when it's been difficult, or when I haven't been in the mood, or I want to create something, and I just like to put myself behind the camera and in front of it. It's a lot of effort to do that. And, it's always rewarding. There's always a reward at the end of it. Even if you have to work really hard at it, there
Hmm.
is always that reward. But it definitely has felt really good being able to work through all of that together. And, there's always funny stories as well. Like when I'm out there by myself, someone walks up to me in the middle of me doing something kind of weird, like to explain it to them, or when I'm bringing my friends along, I'm like, just give me a minute, I got to do this really quick. And
Yeah.
like it is kind of funny. There's always a funny story to be told, so that's part of it.
Well, I love that you have the guts to live out loud to that degree in your friend group and just in the world. I think that's how it should be. And obviously, some really cool art is coming out of that as well.
Thanks.
When do you ever go back and edit old images? Like some photographers do that. I personally don't, but it's maybe not having the. I like to look forward.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to go back and see how my skill set has changed, and my technique has changed. I think the vision is probably quite similar, but the
Hmm.
the actual skill level is probably improved. I definitely have gone back and fixed things that needed to be fixed
Mm.
if I was printing it. Like I've
Oh,
had
sure.
some commissions, and I'd be like, oh, I got it. Like, what was I thinking that was okay, that it looked like that? But so I had to like do a couple, like get rid of some things that I forgot to get rid of, and like, oh God, like I'm glad no one noticed that, or no one said anything at least. But I think for me, once the story has been told, the story's been told, and imperfections are a part of life. And
Mm-hmm.
know, what I created 10 years ago or 12 years ago is what it was for me at that time. And, you know, if I edited it in a certain way, I must have thought that looked great, and now I might do it totally different. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the joy of being able to look back at, that long of taking these photos, is I get to see my progression and how I saw things change, and what I thought was important change, and the way I saw things have kind of evolve. And I look back even a few years ago and I think, like, what was I going for when I was doing that? I don't know why I thought that looked great, but I must have thought it looked good, and I would definitely do it differently now. But it's the story that was told at that point in
Mm-hmm.
time, so we're going with it.
Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of things that have changed since maybe that time.
Hmm.
Your own skill set,
Yeah,
technology, things like that develop and change over time. So it's
exactly.
it's not always that you messed up. Then it's just you're in a different place now.
Exactly. Yeah.
And photography is one of those cool. Not cool. That is not the word I meant to say. Photography is one of those unusual things where we have the ability to look back and
Hmm.
actually change the past to
Yeah.
some degree. And that doesn't. I like that your attitude is what it is. Like, but maybe that is changing the past shouldn't necessarily be what we're focusing on.
Yeah, I think, it would be really easy for me to go and fix things, or to, make it look better or make it look more like I am now. But for me, that would be sort of taking away from who I was at that point in time, and the story that I was obviously telling at
Mm-hmm.
that time. I think for me, like, each image does have its own little time capsule in my own kind of memory, in my own mind, in my own life story. Like, even if it's for nobody else, it's for me. And so I feel like once I've, finished it, saved it, that's good to go. It's like putting the stamp on that, and I don't necessarily want to reopen it. I just want to look at it and just say, like, that was me in 2008, and that's what it is. That's the story
Yeah.
that I'm telling from that day. So,
Did you get like when you first started to do your photography in this way, where you're portraying this? I don't know. I lost the words on how to describe it. But when you're like making yourself miniature in a
mhm.
big magical world,
Yeah.
did you seek feedback, or did you get? I mean, did you post online right away, or did you like, okay, maybe this? What was your?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story. So I grew up and lived in a fairly small town.
Yeah.
And I was really nervous for some reason about people knowing that I was taking these photos. Oh, there's a dog. Not a ghost.
It could have been a ghost on the screen. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, so I was really nervous about, taking these photos and people thinking I was weird, or whatever it was. And so I kept it a secret. And so I was posting them on Flickr. Flickr was sort of like the social media for photography at the time. So this
Mm-hmm.
was pre-Instagram, pre-Facebook. But nobody I knew in real life had Flickr or used Flickr. So it was like the secret, like, I can post these. So
Yeah.
I started sharing my work there, and it felt really like a safe place to do that, because it was really positive. Like, it was an artist community, so it wasn't like social media in the sense that, like, everybody was seeing what you're doing. It's just like an artist community where your peers are there, and people that are interested in what you're doing are there, and you don't have to worry necessarily about, like, trolls or negative comments. So I started sharing my work there, and all of a sudden, like, the number of people that were following me was growing and growing and growing and growing. And I was like, okay, this is quite cool, but, like, nobody in my real life knew that this was happening. And so I was sort of living this double life where, like, I would come home and I would work on photos and I would post it, and I would have like 20,000 followers on Flickr, but, like,
Wow.
nobody in my real life knew that I even owned a camera. And so
Oh
it just
wow.
got super funny and this weird, and it was like my own private little, like, creative world that I lived in.
Sure.
But it did get to the point where they kind of had to interlace and combine, and by that point I felt like I knew who I was. I knew what stories I wanted to tell. I knew what I wanted to do for my own work. And so, there would be the odd comment that I would get, but it was like water off a duck's back. Like, it
Sure. You
doesn't
were
bother me.
already established.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Um, it's also a little bit relatable
Okay.
because when I first started, I remember running the idea by a few friends, like part of it is I didn't feel like I wanted to do it alone, like do
Yeah.
like bigger, more interesting photo shoots or fantasy stuff. And I remember
Hmm.
running it by a few people, like, I can't draw a dragon, but it was similar to you. Like I didn't feel like I could draw, but like I want to make a dragon come to life somehow in this story, that I want to be able to make art,
Yeah.
and make it real. So how do I do that? And I was like, can I, maybe someone has a pet lizard I could borrow and shoot or something. And I never ended up doing anything with that idea, but I remember approaching friends with that idea. Like, what do you think if I take that? And they were all like, are you crazy? And some of my closest friends were like, Emily,
Like what's happening
are
to you?
you okay? Right. And I was like, go back to shooting weddings. And I was like, no, no, I really think I want to do something more creative with this.
Mhm.
And there was one friend, Amber, who really did believe in me. And there were others, to be
Mhm.
fair. I just hadn't found them yet. And we started doing stuff together. And then I remember the first, and you probably remember, like the first shoot you did that was of that type, where you're like, okay, this is what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I've got something.
Yeah, but I kept it secret for a while. When I first posted about it, I remember feeling like it's possible that I will um that I'll get some ridicule for this. And I wasn't as scared of that as I was the other photographers that I had worked with before for other things. I was kind of concerned about what they would think. And it's
Yeah.
silly of me now. Like I look back at that former self and I'm like, all right, come on. But that's how I felt. I was nervous
Yeah.
about making them feel threatened, or
Yeah.
making them feel, I don't know, something
Which
negative.
is funny because it's like it's your work about like stuff that you want to do for yourself, and like we're still so sensitive to like how it comes across, or like it's hard, I think, when you're shooting, more traditional work where it's more client based, or you're shooting portraits. It's like easy to kind of separate yourself from the work. And I think
Hmm.
when you're creating stuff that is coming from your own creativity or your own heart, it's like you want to make sure that it's going to be treated well when it goes out there into the world. And so yeah, it is really tough. I think I was nervous and I still get nervous, like if I meet someone that's not a photographer or that doesn't know what I do, and I tell them, and then I see them like follow me on Instagram, and like, oh, what are they
Yeah, brace yourself.
gonna think now? They're gonna think I'm some weirdo. And it's just like there's like that little bit of like, oh, what are they like? What do they think about this? But I'm pretty okay with it now. At the time, like when those worlds started mixing, it was definitely like I just braced myself for like whatever. Like people are just gonna think I'm some weirdo. And it all collided in this kind of funny way where I used to work in a school, and so like I had a regular 9 to 5 job. I worked in a school, everything was great, and then I had this other world going on with photography and everything. And my brother's friend worked at the newspaper, and she suddenly somehow found my Flickr account, and she's like,
Mm.
"It's amazing! I want to write an article about you." And I was like, "Oh no!" Like, oh. And I was like, oh, this was never supposed to happen. And so like I kind of reluctantly was like, I guess so. Like it's time that I kind of just let that go, because it was quite difficult to kind of just like keep them separate and like try not to let them blend together. So I was like, okay, fine. And it felt a little bit like an expose or something. It was just very like,
Mm-hmm.
here it is. And it was like on the front page, and it was like a whole bunch of my photos. And I was like, well, there's no going back now. Like now everybody knows. So
It's out there. Yep.
jumped in with 2 feet, and like everyone was super super kind and super nice. And
Oh,
like
good.
my hometown is full of really great people, and I shouldn't have anticipated anything other than support. But it's still that nervous thing, like you're saying. Like you just get really, what are people going to think? What are people going to say? Like you're putting so much of yourself out there that it's sort of leading it to whatever could happen. But
Yeah,
there's more good out there. That's what I believe.
I agree with you. Yes, for sure. Did you started like a class people can take? Did that
Hmm.
come from people asking you, how do you do what you do? Or what made you decide to do that? Which I think is
Yeah,
really cool, by the way. I think that's awesome that you are willing to share.
yeah. I think for me, like I'm entirely self-taught. So my running joke is that I've only taken one photography class, It was a black and white film photography class when I was 16,
Okay.
and I absolutely hated it. I hated it so much that when I handed it in at the end of the component, I gave the camera and the film back to the teacher, and I was like, I hated this, and I'm never going to pick up a camera again.
Oh no.
And the funny thing is not only did I end up becoming really close friends with that photography teacher, we are very close friends now.
Oh, good.
I ended up working in that same school in her classroom, teaching photography. So,
Whoa.
helping to teach photography, and I still go in there and do presentations. And so it's like I have to kind of eat my own words. But I think because I'm self-taught, I really saw the value in learning from other people and learning from what other people were willing to share. And, the internet is such an amazing resource that has allowed people from all corners of the earth. Like I said, I grew up in a small town. We didn't have, a creative arts university or creative classes that I could take in that way. So the internet was truly this like unlimited resource of knowledge. And so I really love education. Obviously, I worked in a school, so making sure that people have access to education and feel supported in learning new things was really important.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I started kind of gaining this momentum and this following of other people, I would get asked a lot, like, how did you do this? Like, I don't know how to do this. And so I just thought, I don't own any of these techniques. It's not like I didn't stumble across this magic potion. It's just in the program. So
Yeah.
I can teach you how to do it. And so I started teaching workshops at first, and I did 2 summers in a row with some friends. We did a whole workshop tour across North America. So we lived out of a van and we went all across North America, and we
Wow.
taught workshops all the way around. And it was great. We got to teach some amazing students, amazing things. And, I really saw the doors open for a lot of people where they felt like, oh, I'm not alone in these crazy ideas. Like we said, like sometimes when you think you're alone in it, you're less likely to try and push yourself to try new things. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think just being in a room with like 15 other people that are also coming up with crazy ideas, it just gives you that permission to like think outside the box and to try it. So we saw a lot of that, and I just saw how important it was for people just to learn how to do something from someone that they saw doing it. And so yeah, creating the course, it came kind of during the pandemic. I was asked to create this editing course, and it was like, of course I'll do that. Of course I have no problem spilling all my secrets. And so it was literally like we talked about how it's pretty much they just like put a wire in my brain and I just dumped it all out, and like I answered every question they had about what I could teach. And you know I was happy to just give as much as I could, and it's been really rewarding seeing people trying new things. And I'll get people that send me their finished results and like, what do you think? And it's like, it's great. Like, if you're happy with it and you try something new and you learned a different technique, then that's a win. That's a win right there. So
How wonderful. I think that's so cool that you have. I imagine rewarding too when you see something that you had the ability to teach someone else and then they
Mhm.
create their own and then bring it back to show you what they did.
Yeah.
This is what you helped me create because of what you taught me. That that sounds like you said, it's a huge win. And
Yeah.
it's also the attitude behind it is a lot like Brooke Shaden, where she's like,
Mhm.
take these techniques and use them, go make $1 million.
Yeah.
And she's like absolutely wishes you success after she shows you literally from step 1 to step 20,000 what she
Yeah.
did. Here's all 300 layers of my image.
Oh,
And
exactly.
and I think that's when I first heard her say that, I was like, what are, I lived in a world where everything was proprietary.
Mhm.
And so my brain went, what are you doing giving this away? I kind of like that, but also it feels like
Yeah.
you shouldn't. But you know what? Yeah, everybody has their own style. There's no, even if people go out there and try to exactly copy you or her or anybody, it's not really going to be a copy. It's still their own
No,
version of it.
exactly. Yeah. And I
So,
think for me, like I always just wanted people to learn the technique, and then just like now you know how to do it. Now you can put you into it. So like
mm-hmm.
doing it is really just pushing some buttons and clicking a mouse around. Like that's the doing it. But it's this part of it that I can't teach someone how to do it. So it's like that's each individual person's magic ingredient, special ingredient.
Mm-hmm.
I can't give that to everyone. That comes from each person. But I can tell you which buttons to push and how to do it and where to put things. And that's that, I don't own that. Nobody owns that. So I'm more than happy to share it and give it away. And, it's I think that's the beauty of art, is that we're supposed to be able to see it and embrace it and experience it, and no one should necessarily feel like they own it. And so yeah, I think I've given people my Photoshop files to like have a look. Like, it's hard for me to explain it, but here's the file. You can just look through the layers and see
Mm-hmm.
what it looks like. I don't mind. So yeah, I think when you see someone that really loves what they do, and they know that they have their own unique style, they're not afraid to teach other people how to do it, because it is something that everyone should get to experience and learn how to do for themselves.
And the creativity does come from you. The the artist behind
Definitely,
it
yeah.
is the creativity portion. And you're right, you can't teach that. That's something
Yeah, and
that
I think for me, like, I do try and teach people how to. I think that we are all creative. I think that we're born creative beings. As I always say, like, when you're a little kid and when you get given a sheet of paper and someone's like, draw your family, you draw them in the funniest way possible, like long little legs and like 20 fingers, and like you
mm-hmm.
just draw whatever, you just draw it. And it's super creative, it's super funny, and it's super you, because that's what you see the world as being. And as we grow up, we just learn to like shut those doors in our brain of like, that's not what that looks like, that's not what that looks like, that's not what that looks like. And we just end up being so uncreative and just so narrowly, fixated on what reality is or what we're supposed to be doing. And I think that the biggest challenge in being an artist or wanting to create is just opening those doors back up and just saying, like, that can be, the sky can be blue, or it could be pink, or it could be yellow, or that person could be 1 inch tall, or it could be 100 feet tall. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's art.
It's
And so
art. Yep.
I spend a lot of time trying to teach people like how to daydream and how to unlock those doors in their mind, and like what I do when I'm feeling a little bit blocked. And because I do think that I think that's the biggest thing that people would say to me is like, oh, I could never do that. I'm not very creative, or I'm not very artistic, or I don't have those ideas. I'm like, I bet you do. Like, I bet if I sat here for an hour and just like let you slowly feel calm and okay enough to start unwinding those kind of ideas of what things are supposed to be, you will have something that comes out that is creative, and
Mm-hmm.
you will have an idea that is a little bit out there. And it's just letting yourself sort of follow that, it's a little bit out there, path. And then that's the end of it.
Yep. Absolutely. I'm 100% on board with this. You are exactly right. I've done a little bit of public speaking, and it's been on creativity. And it's
Mm,
interesting how if I go into a room of people and I'll say, okay, everybody raise your hand if you've been creative somehow in your life. And a few will raise their hand. They're used to having some level of art, or, they understand creativity. And then there's other people when I say, okay, now raise your hand if you don't think you're creative at all. Because I hear it a lot too. And it'll be a shocking number of people that will raise their hand. And I'm
yeah,
always blown, every time, it does not fail. I'm always blown away at the number of people that don't feel they're creative. And the
yeah,
thing that I've found it comes down to many times is, like, if you were to ask them to draw their family, the pressure that they put themselves on because they're 40 instead of 4.
hmm,
Because at 4 years old, a child has no pressure to draw accurately. They're just
no,
going to dive in and make stick people, and they're going to be, like you said, 20 fingers and whatever. And it
yep,
doesn't matter to them because they're just drawing their family, and they have the full ability to let themselves go and just do it and experience the moment. And for some reason, that's harder when you get older. And they
yeah,
put this pressure on themselves, like they can't draw like they would have when they were 4, even though they don't have any more skills to draw than when they were 4.
yeah,
And I'm always trying to unravel that when I'm doing these public speaking things, because I'm like, no, if you altered a recipe, you are creative.
hmm,
Ever. If you
yeah,
ever switched up something or did troubleshooting in some way, you are creative.
yeah. And I think people, they think if creativity, or doing anything creative, it has to be this big grand gesture with all these, I have to have a big canvas with a bunch of paint, or I have to, you know, create something out of clay. And it's like, it really doesn't. Like, if you write like a 3 sentence poem in a birthday card, that is creative. Like, that's great. If
Mm-hmm.
you decorate a cake, like, that's creative. Like, embrace it and take it somewhere and see what you can do with it. But I think, yeah, I think we assume that creativity is like a born thing, and that you're just kind of bestowed this thing, and it's every, you know, one set of 100 people who get this thing. And it's not. Like, when I play Legos with my nieces and nephews, like, they don't have that. Like, this isn't right. And like, even when I think that I'm being creative in the Legos, and they're like, Uncle Joel, that's not what that looks like. Like, all right. It's like, they have their own creativity. And I think that, yeah, it's just reminding people. And I think that that's been really difficult, I would say, in some people's reaction to what I do, because I'm, you know, 40 now. I'm a grown man, and like, this is the work that I do. It's very whimsical, it's very childlike, sometimes it's very dreamy, it's very out of the box. And I think people still kind of are like, well, that's different for someone that, you know, I would assume wouldn't be creating stuff like that. And you know, creativity doesn't have that. Like, when I look at the people that I looked up to as a kid, like Walt Disney and Lewis Carroll and all those storytellers, they were well into their middle age, late stages of life, and they were
Mm-hmm.
still incredibly creative and still creating without boundaries, without limits. So it's just something we have to give ourselves permission to be, is creative.
Absolutely. Give yourself permission to be creative.
Hmm.
Um, Thank you for inspiring me to break out the Legos, because that is one of my favorite things on earth.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, we used to have a huge Lego set growing up. It was just like a bunch of random pieces, I think. I don't know
Yeah,
if we really had many holes. Maybe the
like set.
castle set. But yeah, like, and yeah, that was one of my favorite. I think have some Legos around here. I might have
Oh,
to.
they're great.
Yeah, we used to put them in old ice cream buckets, and then
Hmm.
that's how we stored them. And other things would get mixed in, so you'd have little toys that weren't Lego, because
Yeah.
you can mix them up.
Of course.
Also, Lego and train sets
Okay,
go
yeah.
well together, because you can
There you
build
go.
bridges and all kinds of things.
Perfect.
Just saying.
Perfect.
You also, um, this isn't really in the vein of art necessarily, but you also run marathons. Yes?
Hmm. Yeah.
And I realize this isn't an art thing, but I'm wondering if it ties into your art somehow.
Um, I think a little bit. Like, I kind of started both at the same time,
Okay.
which it sounds absolutely chaotic to be like, I'm going to pick up a hobby that's going to take over my whole life, and then I'm also going to take up another hobby that's going to take over my whole life. Um, but I think they both have helped me in different ways. I think it's all part of who I am. And I think, you know, I when I was growing up, I was not athletic at all. And, you know, I'm assuming that, you know, Canadians are quite closely linked to like kind of Minnesota and that area where like winter sports is a big thing. And if you like, everyone plays hockey, everyone skates, everyone skis, that sort of thing. And like,
Hmm.
I can do all those things, but I was never drawn to it. It was not my thing at all. And so when I was in my 20s and I started running, I was like, oh, I really like this. I'm actually pretty good at it. And so I just started doing it as like just because I felt like it gets me outside of
Sure.
it. And then around the same time that I was, you know, getting into photography, I had my grandmother passed away, and we were very, very close. And so I kind of needed to work through that.
Yeah.
And photography was doing it, but it was still, it was like, it was a bit too raw. Like, it was a bit too much to actually put all those feelings into a photo. Like, I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
So I signed up to run a marathon, and I was like, I'm just gonna run. I'm gonna run it out of my system. And so I just ran, and I ran a marathon, and I was hooked. And so I realized that it gave me this time where I couldn't be attached to anything else other than my body. So like, I couldn't be on my phone, I couldn't be on my computer, I couldn't be on my with my camera, I couldn't really be with anyone else. So it's like the only time in my life where I was just by myself. And like, I don't always run with music, and I don't always run with other people. And so it's just me by myself out in nature. And it really just gave me so much time. And like, I felt like I was being given like this luxury time to like just process everything. And like, in that span of those first few years of me running, I really just processed so much stuff in my head of like stuff that I had gone through, stuff that I was going through, stuff that I needed to, deal with. And it just like unwound all of it in my head. And it's just like, I always like to say, like, I just sweated it out. Like it was gone, it was gone, it was gone. And I just realized how like important it was for me. But it also gave me time to daydream as well, because I would just get to the point where I was just like, my body is just doing what it's doing. I can just sit in my head and just think. And like I would just come up with ideas, or I would work through what I wanted to do. And it was just like this free time where I was given to like do all that stuff. And so it does work its way into itself, where I can kind of use it as an excuse to kind of brainstorm or come up with ideas, or even location scout. Like sometimes I'll go for a run and be like, oh, I got to come back to that because I saw a really cool thing that I ran past. So I got to go back and look at that. So it all works together. And I think for me, it's nice to have a hobby that is so different than kind of my work that I do. So like just being able to do something totally different, and focus my energy, my attention, have friends that do different things than my photography world. It's been really beneficial. It's been really rewarding as well.
I'm sorry, I'm going to take a quick break because I'm having an audio issue.
Oh no.
Yeah, it started to it's my earbuds, I think.
Oh.
There we go. I think we're good now.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, we're good. I can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
I was going to ask if you ever were running and saw something and they were like, wait, I need to photograph that.
All the time. All the time, yeah. And I think like when I lived in Canada, like I would just run in the mountains and it would be beautiful, and like you get to see beautiful landscapes. So it was like a mental note of like, come back at this time, like this is the sunset's here. So it kind of gave me this like mental note of stuff. And now that I live in the UK now, and it's like I can run to a castle, or I can run to these abandoned ruins, or like a witch's cave, or like all these like crazy stuff. And it's just like it just gets my imagination going, because it's just like I'll run to like a castle and be like, okay, what story could I tell here? And like I'll think about it while I'm running. And it's just like, yeah, it definitely like opens up my mind to thinking about different stuff, and thinking about new ideas, and kind of combining them into one, for sure.
That's one thing I love about the UK. I've been there a few times, and the first time I went, I remember thinking it was the coolest thing to be on the train, and you're going past these fields, and there's sheep, and there's land, and there's rolling hills, and it's beautiful, and then up on the landscape pops, there's a castle, and here's another one, and here's another one, and I'm like, wow, I did not realize how many little castles and castle-like buildings there are everywhere, and how the I don't mean to say this in a negative light at all, but when you grow up there, you probably don't realize like how much not like that it is here.
Yeah, I think when I moved here, like when I first moved here, the people I lived with were just like, I didn't even know that was there.
Right,
Like,
I know.
I even heard of that. How did you know about that? I'm like, I went for a run and I saw it.
Right.
Like,
And I was like,
so,
that's the coolest graveyard I've ever seen. And then
yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
I have a thing for old ruins. And so that spoke to me when I was there. And it's
yeah.
harder to find them here.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and it's like it's funny because like last year I was kind of doing this challenge with some on Instagram, and I'd be like, tell me how long I should run, like run until I see this. And so someone was like, run until you see a castle, and I was like, well, that's only going to take me 10 minutes. So like I need a bit more of a challenge. I need a bit more of a challenge. So it's quite funny.
Ah, how glorious that you can run for 10
Quite
minutes
lucky.
and see a
Very
castle.
lucky. Very lucky. I could
That's
probably see it from the house actually if I looked.
Oh, that's wonderful. So what part of the UK are you in?
Right now I'm in Hampshire, so kind of on the border of Surrey and Hampshire, which is about 40 minutes southwest of London.
Okay.
So it's called Jane Austen country, so it's kind of where Jane Austen lives. So her house is like 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away. So lots of rolling hills, lots of greenery, lots of beautiful thatched cottages, and very nice to be over here.
That is a great area, yes. And you can run to Jane Austen's house.
I could, yeah.
That is wonderful. I remember visiting Cornwall and trying to drive, and that was fun. And,
Yeah.
especially because if you haven't driven in the UK, especially in parts of the old country where there's one lane. I'm not
Winding
talking
road.
about one lane each direction,
No,
one
just
lane.
a farm road.
Yeah. And then there's these walls, and they're covered with ivy, which is
Yeah,
beautiful. But you don't realize that the ivy has a really solid stone wall behind it. So
yeah.
you cannot, do not risk brushing up against that ivy with your
No.
car
Oh,
because you will destroy it. Your car, not the wall.
yeah. We were in Cornwall a couple of years ago and like kind of driving around one of those roads, and it was like first we had to wait for like a bunch of sheep to cross the road, and then we were driving, and it
Mm-hmm.
was just this narrow, narrow road. And we turned the corner, and there was just a double-decker bus just like coming down the road. I was like, surely that can't be allowed on here.
What do we
What?
do? Right.
Like, oh, I guess we back up. So we just had to
Right.
back up until we could wait until it passed. But I was like, imagine driving a double-decker bus down this road
That
every
sounds like a
day.
nightmare.
It's not my job, no.
Oh, what a great adventure, though.
Definitely, definitely.
What cool
It's definitely
stories.
been like I think, moving here is been a challenge for sure, but it's opened up my ideas and my creativity in lots of different ways. And um, yeah, just being able to absorb stories from different places that I never would go to has been it's been really rewarding. And just being around some really incredible like places in history has been really cool as well. Like I've been working on this series of images this year around trees, and a month ago I went to visit this ancient tree that I've been wanting to visit for a long time, and it's probably about 40 minutes away on the train, and it's near Windsor, and it was like where the Magna Carta was signed, and they said that's
Okay.
where Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII got engaged in front of this tree. And it's like just this incredible yew tree, and it's just to think of like it's 1,000 years old, and it's lived through all this history, and like kings and queens and everyone have like stood right here touching
Mm-hmm.
the same stuff that I'm touching. It blows my mind, but it's like it gives me so many more stories to want to try and create and tell through what I get to see. So
That sounds amazing. I felt that way too when I was in Edinburgh, and there's like a chapel from like the
mhm.
1300s, which just
Yeah,
kind of blows
yeah,
my mind about the age of this chapel. And it has this tiny little stained glass window in it. And I was like, they don't. That's the other amazing thing is they don't rope things off like we do here.
no, no.
So you can touch those walls. You
Yeah.
could touch that window. Maybe you
Hmm.
shouldn't. And I feel like I was super respectful because I feel like that's somehow
Yeah.
sacred, but like the fact that nobody was really been watching, like,
Mhm.
yeah, just go in there and check out the
Yeah.
chapel. That was so amazing though, and that there is such history there is
Mhm.
it has a magic of its own.
Definitely. One of my favorite places to create in is it's about 15-minute drive, and
Hmm.
it's this old ruined abbey. So it's called Waverley Abbey.
Oh yeah.
And so it's about 1,000 years old. And then it was kind of partly demolished when Henry VIII demolished all of the abbeys and churches and stuff in England. And it's just in ruins now. But it's like you said, like it's just in the middle of a field, and like there's no one else around. You can go whenever you want, and it's just like has these cool like big arched windows and like all these cool ruins and stuff. And it's just like this amazing place. And I just think like it's a miracle that it has survived just people over the last thousand years. And it's still just here for people to look at and create with. And you'll always see like people doing photo shoots and different stuff there, and it's just such a cool thing to get to see and to go up and touch. And it's like this was put here 1,000, like someone built this 1,000 years ago, and it's
Yeah,
still here.
that's so amazing.
It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah. Have you been to the US before?
Hmm. I
Yeah.
have, yeah. I spent quite a lot of time in the US. So I did a road trip. I did two road trips across the US. So we started in the Northeast, so Boston area,
Okay.
and then we drove across to Portland, and then we drove down to New Mexico, and then down to
Wow.
Florida, and then up the other coast, up back to the
Wow.
Gulf. So we did that twice, and then I've been to quite a lot of kind of states in between. Lots of friends that live in the US, so I've been really lucky to visit them. And the thing is that everyone always kind of says like, oh, I wish I had cool stuff around me, and there's cool stuff everywhere. Like when I was
Mm-hmm.
in the US, there was some pretty cool stuff that we saw, and like pretty amazing things I've never seen anywhere else. And so I think, it just depends on what you want to see and what you want to photograph. But there's good stuff everywhere.
There is.
You just have to be open to seeing it for sure.
That and one tip, because I've lived in a bunch of different places myself, and one of the things about moving and being in a place where you don't know what's out there as far as
Mm.
cool things, or if you have lived in a place all your life and you don't think there's cool things, one way to find out what the cool things are is to go ask people,
Yeah, yeah,
because they might know something you don't.
yeah.
And I thought here in Minnesota there's not going to be any ruins, that because I love ruins. Where are they? And everyone's like, there aren't ruins around here. It's Minnesota. Like, we weren't developed as long ago as, the Northeast and
Mm,
or the South, And so, okay, but I found some. I asked around enough, and there are a few ruins around here.
there you
And
go.
yeah, and so I would say ask, as a tip to our listeners, because there are definitely, like you said, everywhere there is in
Yeah.
the landscape or in the architecture.
And I think for the most part, like photographers and creative people, they want to kind of show their favorite spots, or like they're kind of like, oh, check out this cool thing that I saw. And so I kind of did the same thing when I moved to the UK. I didn't even know what I was going to find when I
Right.
came over here. It's just sort of on a whim that I decided to move, and I ended up in, this town that I didn't know that much about. And I kind of had to ask people, or I would look on Instagram and like scroll through like what was tagged with the name of the town until I could see something cool, and I would go and
Mm.
look for it. And yeah, you just have to kind of put a bit of effort into searching what's around, and you just never know.
Mm-hmm.
I was so afraid when I moved, because I was like, I'm used to living in the Rockies in Canada. There's like so much nature everywhere. Like, where am I going to go? Like, am I going to see anything that I can photograph? Like, what am I going to use for backdrops? And I was spoiled for choice. I remember the first spring that I lived here, I had never seen like a bluebells forest before.
Oh,
And I went up into this woods that was near where I lived, and the whole forest floor was just bluebells. It was just like blue.
wow.
It was just like it was like magic, and I was like, "This is incredible! Like I've never seen anything like this before." And just like it's only there every year for like 3 or 4 weeks, and then it's gone. And so like you only get it that time. And like every time I go every year, and I'm still
Yeah.
blown away. Like this happens every year.
Oh,
And like
yeah. I would go every year too.
so it's just like, yeah, you just never know what you're gonna find out there. And yeah, people I think genuinely will want to help you and show you something cool as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You mentioned a couple times earlier about being inspired and the things you're inspired by. Do you
Hmm.
ever go out and fuel your inspiration on purpose?
Definitely, yeah. So I would say like my creativity comes in two ways. It's like one where I like purposefully sit down and I like daydream, or like try and come up with an idea based off of something I'm thinking about or feeling, or a word that's been buzzing around in my head. Or I will just sort of kind of open myself up to absorbing whatever comes my way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I love going to museums, and I love going to performances. I love going to shows, to concerts. I love looking at other people's art. I love just being around different types of art that I necessarily don't do, because I just think that when you see other people doing what they love to do without fear, or just doing it because they love doing it, if anything else, it just reinforces that idea that like they're out there doing it and I should be doing it too. And so I think all of those things together really do help fuel that creativity when I'm not even thinking that it's doing that. But honestly, for me, like the biggest thing is just being outside, away from like anything real.
Yeah.
So like no computers, no phones, no music, no nothing. I'll just go for a walk in the woods, and like without fail, I will come out of that walk with at least two ideas. And like
Oh,
I don't go into it thinking about anything, but I will come out with something. And it's just like I think that for me, and I think that's part of it, is that everyone's going to be different. And I know that that works for me because I've done it for years. I've just, removing myself away from the modern kind of world and just going into the woods and like coming out an hour later with an idea. But for some people, it might be that they need to be in a busy place. Maybe they need to sit in a coffee shop and watch people coming in and coming out, coming up with a story about that person. Or maybe they need to listen to music, or maybe they need to do a different kind of mindfulness exercise or meditate or do something. It's just taking that time to learn what works best for you, and giving yourself the permission to do those things as well. And I think for me, like, that's why I joke that I'm a professional daydreamer, is that, like, that's actually a crucial part of my job. It's like
Mm-hmm.
giving myself the time to daydream, because that's the first step in actually doing all of this, is like coming up with a good idea. So it's like, I will just say, you know what, it's Tuesday, the weather is nice, I'm going to go for an hour walk, and we're going to come up with something while I'm out there. And with that, I don't think I've ever had that not work, to be honest. Not, fingers crossed that it keeps.
That is wonderful. That is, I love what you're inspired by, and your work that comes out of that. I think that's fabulous, and that you're willing to share it. I think um that's really amazing that you give back in that form as well. I think that's helpful to the community and to the world. And one thing I wanted to ask is, because you do teach other people how to do it, if you had one thing you wanted to portray, if nothing else, what would you want to say to your students? Or, you know what, I just lost audio entirely. Hold on to that thought.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to edit that out. Go. Please start
um,
over.
I would say that the most important thing is to just find out what makes you uniquely you. And I think, I always tell people, like, we we collect these titles throughout our entire life. So whether it's mom, dad, brother, sister, vegetarian, singer, creative, left-handed, whatever it is, we collect all these different titles, and we like to say, like, these are what make me me. And those things all they do make us who we are. And sometimes those words are not always nice. Sometimes they're hard to swallow, or they're things that we wish didn't, attach themselves to
Mm-hmm.
us. But all those things, they kind of form this puzzle of who we are. And it's sort of like, what stories can you tell, or what visuals can you make, or you know, what creativity can you exude that tells us what it's like to be you? Because you're the only one that can do that. I can never tell the story of what your life is like. No matter if we talked for 100 hours, I would still never be able to tell the world what life was like for you in the way that you would tell it yourself. And I think that's the key to it, is like, I can teach someone how to use a camera, and I can teach them shutter speed, and I can teach them how to use layers in Photoshop, and those are really valuable tools to learn. But I will never be able to tell someone what life looks like through their perspective. And the sad joy of life is that we only can do this once, as far as we know. And if you don't tell us your story, no one's ever going to know it. And that, to me, is the saddest thing, is that there's so many stories that we'll never know because people didn't have the courage to share them. And I think that's my biggest wish, or my biggest, like, ask when people take a course of mine, or they ask for advice, is like, just tell the story. Just tell the story. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to be, told in this epic format. Just tell the story. Tell it. That's the most important thing.
Just tell the story.
Hmm.
I love it. That is perfect.
Thanks.
Well done. Well, you know, this has been such a joy to chat
Oh,
with you
thank you.
today, and
That's it.
I love that you said yes to being on our show and spending this time with me. And I'm really, Trey is sick today, and I'm sad he couldn't be here. But I'm also, like, really kind of, it's been cool to just be able to chat with you myself.
Yeah.
And so I hope Trey gets better and can join us again soon. But for me personally, this was really cool. So
Well, thank you
thank
so
you.
much for inviting me, and for the great conversation, and for, just asking questions to artists that give them that permission to be themselves, and to inspire great conversations. And I think that's what the world needs, is more conversations around what makes the world a better place and a more interesting place. And, more of that is definitely going to make the world a much, much better place for everybody.
I hope so. Yeah. Thank you. That's the goal.
Perfect.
Well, this episode, along with probably every episode, is always in memory of Joe Capone, our moderator, fellow comedian, passionate encourager, and greatly missed curmudgeon friend. Find us pretty much wherever you tune into podcasts. For updates, announcements, and more, please follow us on social media under Modern Romantic. And in the meantime, go play with Legos, go make art, and tell your story.
Definitely. Tell your story.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great day.